Crystal's asking, so there's two types of faith, one that saves and one that varies. She's asking.
Where's that? I'm looking.
It's the last comment.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if she's referring to something specific there, but I do think you look at the parable of the sower, right? There is that faith that's transitory, and there for a season it looks exactly like saving faith. It begins to sprout fruit, and then, you know, in one case the cares of the world, money, riches, wealth drowns it out. In another case, things get hard through suffering, and the person walks away. And so those are you know, true saving faith is also a faith that's going to last.
Right.
It's Eugene Peterson's, you know, long obedience in a single direction. Faith brings fruit and lasts long term. It's not a
surprise you quote Peterson.
Yeah, well,
I was like, what?
Yeah, I'm not endorsing everything, but
no, that's good. That's good.
But yeah, I think. I mean, we want to be careful in how we get into saying there's two types of faith. We want to be careful. You know, somebody comes into our church, and we don't want to raise the bar so high that we're just like knocking them around.
Type 1 faith. That's type 2 faith.
Faith. Well, I'm not sure if you're really saved there, brother. Right. You haven't done X, Y, Z, and you can become fruit inspectors. I take more of the approach, just pastorally. You know, you take someone at their word until you see evidence to the contrary. So, I mean, you know, somebody walks into your church, and I'm sure you've dealt with this, Los, but somebody walks in and they say, yeah, I'm a believer. And then you know, you talk to them for 5 minutes, all of a sudden they don't even believe like Jesus died on the cross and the resurrection. And and you're like, okay, yeah, you're not a believer. And you can, you know, other times, you know, they know all the right answers, doctrinally check all the right boxes. You're like, yeah, I think this is a person of real faith. And then life goes sideways and they get into some sin, and they're not even. And I'm not talking about somebody that just struggles with sin. We all do that. I'm talking about somebody that gets sideways and is totally unrepentant.
Right.
And then you have to start to say, well, you know, what this is, I think James 2 and some of those other places, your life isn't lining up with the profession that you've made, and that we're not trying to be nitpicky, but that calls into question what you say you believe.
Yeah.
So there, just because the proof of faith isn't just because someone says, I have faith. And that really is the argument of James 2. You know, somebody walks in and says, you know, hey, I have faith. And James says, great, I'll show you my faith by what I do. You know, and we sometimes do think, if I brag a lot about my faith, everybody is going to know I have it. And James is saying, like, no, we'll know you have it when you live it out. And so when James says, you know, James is the only place in Scripture that uses the phrase faith alone, and he uses it negatively. But he's not talking about salvation by faith alone. He's talking about the person that comes in and says, you know,
says he has it.
Right, and that's the only sign.
Right.
If I say, look, I can live how I want, but I have faith alone, and I am saved.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, wait a minute. If the fruit isn't coming along, you know, how do we know the tree's not rotten? Right. That's really what James is dealing with. And maybe, you know, some people think he's maybe dealing with a group that has perverted what Paul was teaching, and it's impossible to know for sure, but I think that's certainly a possibility. Paul, on the other hand, you know, says that we're justified by faith apart from works, and that really is where Luther threw in and Luther wasn't the first to do it, but he really emphasized this means by faith alone, because that it's to the exclusion of any kind of work or contribution, works of the law. Works of the law are just things that you do in obedience to God. So you're excluding any kind of activity outside of faith. And it's a right reading of the passage there.
That's good.